She's a fire, fire, fire. When you look into her eyes, no, you can't deny her. She's a fire, fire, fire. When you look into her eyes, no, you can't deny her.
Welcome to another episode of I Am Nala podcast. Our new season centers around the one and only the vagina. Everybody seems to have a say, but women, especially survivors who have been unseen, unheard, and silenced for too long. Here we bring conversations to its foundations to talk about vagina's health, consent, and agency by survivors themselves, the stories of being and becoming as African feminists. Today, I'm deeply honored to be joined by a visionary, a campaigner, a powerful advocate for women's rights. Her journey is one of transformation and reclaiming agency in the face of adversity. Through her lived experiences as a survivor, she has become a force for change, challenging harmful practices, fighting for a world where women and girls can live freely and fully. Somali-British activist, Black, beautiful, and brave. Please join me in welcoming our Nala, Shamsa Araweelo. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am super honored to take part and do my part in not only creating awareness, but giving true and raw education on the topic of FGM from a survivor's point of view, but also from a activist point of view.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm okay. Can't complain. How are you?
Good, good. You are tuning in from the UK. Is it cold?
It's freezing. Hence why I'm wearing a jacket. It's cold.
So, in 3 words, who is Shamsa?
Shamsa is a mother. She is an academic, and I am a survivor. And brilliant, shall I just say.
Tell me, how powerful is the vagina?
We as a human race would not exist without the vagina. We are dependent on it in terms of reproduction. We, as women who have vaginas, are the ones to bring offspring and the next generation into this world. So the vagina is a necessity. It is the most powerful genital ever, whether it's on an animal or on a human being. It is incredibly remarkable. The strength of it, the power that it carries, the life that it brings onto the planet. You know, it's something that should be celebrated, not looked down on.
100%. Before we dig into all of these issues, tell us about how is it growing up in Somalia? What did you study? How were you as a kid?
Growing up, I was very mischievous, but when it comes to education, I used to believe that I was stupid, that I was incapable of learning. I suffered from dyslexia, which did not really help, especially because there wasn't much education about dyslexia within my community. So I grew up believing that I just could not, handle book and pen and paper. I couldn't. But by the time that I reached 27, I thought, come on, now that you are an adult, you need to go back and see what you're capable of. So I started my foundation degree and I surprised myself. I had multiple panic attacks at the university because I was doing so well and I couldn't understand why I was doing so well, especially because for years I convinced myself and those around me convinced me that I was not capable, purely because I was outspoken, because I always had something to say, I had a strong voice. So they saw that as someone who is wild. So I just believed I wasn't capable, but I passed with flying colors, and I ultimately did 3 years of my degree after. And I graduated in September of 2023 with policing and criminal investigation, because I love learning about the criminal justice system, especially as someone who has come from a country where there is no formal legal system. There is no justice. There are barely any voices. So I wanted to make a difference in my country, but also understand the criminal justice system, what works, what doesn't work, and how it can possibly be improved, especially when it comes to survivors. Not only survivors of FGM, but survivors in general, how they can be better supported, how they can seek justice, and really look into what isn't working and why it isn't working. So when you go to university or you're studying, choosing a topic that or subject that you are passionate about, it makes the whole process really, really easy and incredibly enjoyable. And you will pass with flying colors. You won't even realize, how you did it by the end of it. You're like, oh my God, I'm done. And you will surprise yourselves. We limit ourselves, especially those that are severely traumatized. We limit ourselves because there's always been self-doubt. There's other people doubting you and your abilities. You have never had the chance to explore your talents or your passion, or even have the mindset to think about further education or future career. But having grown up the way that I did and experienced the amount of trauma I did, if I can do it, especially with my dyslexia, I can guarantee you every single person on this planet is also capable, and they all have a purpose in life. It's just finding it.
That's a brilliant advice, and congratulations on the degree.
Thank
That's
you.
a
Thank
milestone.
you.
So, Shamsa, you have undergone female genital mutilation, FGM. I'm assuming it was at 5 years old, and you say, I was cut, not mutilated. Give us 101 FGM course. What is it? What are the different types? How it is operated?
So when it comes to FGM, it goes by different names. It is known to people using different names. In Somalia alone, it is Hananes, it is Guditan, it is Sunnah. So, and then there's Sunnah Kabir. So there are 4 different ways of referring to FGM in just one country. And ultimately, and also female circumcision. And I think in Somalia, there are different types as well, and they also have names for them. So, for example, Fir'auni was the type that myself and the older generation experienced more of. Don't get me wrong, it still happens in really rural areas, but it is commonly with the older generation and some young. But that is kind of dying down a little bit. My mother experienced scraping of the inner canal of the vagina, where I didn't. And then there is Sunnah Kabir, which is the cutting of the labia minora, the labia majora, and the clitoris hood, but though they won't sew you together necessarily. But in the UK and in the Western world, there are 4 types of female genital mutilation. So type 1 is the partial or full removal of the clitoris. And in some cases, they are sewn together, but in other cases, they are not. When I say sewn together, in some cases it is halfway, and in other cases it is full way. It depends on the culture, the community, the belief system, and the reason why they are subjecting the girl to this type of practice. Type 2 is the removal part or full removal of the clitoris and the labia minora. Again, in some cases it's sewn, and in other cases it's not. Type 3, it is the partial or full removal of the clitoris, the labia minora, and the labia majora. In some cases as well, the clitoris hood, and then the women are either sewn together partially or fully. Type 4 is any other type of damage or trauma to the female genitalia, including piercing, pricking, burning, scraping.
Okay, let me digest that, because FGM to me was just FGM. Like,
Yeah,
now that you're laying this up, it's so if it's degrees of how it's done, then it's also degrees of the consequences of the damage as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. Depending on the type of FGM you've had, the complications could, all our complications, doesn't matter which type you've had, they are long-lived. However, there are some who are considered more severe than others. But in my eyes, they are all just as bad as each other. Obviously, a vulva that has been cut and then sewn together, and for that to then heal like that, heal shut, and you live with it for 10, 15, 20 years, is going to bring about a lot more complications. For example, when the young girl does get her period, there is no period flow. It obstructs the entrance because the hole is so small that there's not a lot of blood that can come through. It can cause a tremendous amount of pain, but also it can accumulate inside of the young girls, causing even more damage, leading to infertility and internal damage. So depending on the severity of the cut, depending on what was used, depending on the environment, whether it was sterile or not, depending on what they put on the wound afterwards, the complications can vary. But one thing that we all have in common is recurrent infections, the PTSD, the mental health issues that we experience, the psychological issues, as well as, for a lot of us, it's also physical torment. Because although your FGM might not be as severe as mine, for example, or mine might not be as severe as yours, doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, your experience is not worthy of being heard, or that for you that experience is just as bad as, you know, as the others. I don't want to ever lessen the trauma of others. I don't think that's something that we should do. So, you know, the majority of the world, I think, tends to focus on type 3 because it is considered the worst type of FGM, but all types of FGM is absolutely horrific to experience. And for a lot of us, we go on with our lives believing that we are less than women, that we are damaged goods, especially when we come to the realization that FGM is actually a crime and it could have been prevented and should never have happened. Then reality hits a little different, and it can become very, very overwhelming. And we also have learned that it doesn't matter what type of trauma you have gone through, your body keeps score. You know, your body is fully aware of the trauma that is experienced, and it does not forget. So it might manifest in different ways, back pain, aching of the shoulders, or a persistent headache, or weakened limbs. Trauma manifests in different ways when it comes to your body, and especially if you are still traumatized by what you had gone through and you haven't started your healing journey. It can be very, very challenging to live with, both physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, and also financially.
Really, really good observation and a reminder, because sometimes we have those pain and we don't understand what's happening. I'm healthy, I'm fit, like why do I have this pain? And it's stored trauma. So I've gone through something in North Africa we call tasfih, which happens in the Maghreb region, so Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco. And it doesn't have any physical well, it has a little bit of physical damage. They scratch your knees 7 times, make you eat grapes with the blood of your knee and all that. But the ritual itself is the scary part. It's you do it before you get your period. You have these elder women who come in. You are with your female cousin. It's like a whole ceremony, and you don't understand what the heck is going on. And that
Yeah.
memory is one of those that can, block you from whatever. And then you have to say, I am a wall, he's a threat. And nobody explained to you what does that mean. And then before you get married, you have to say, I am a thread, he's a wall. So like it's locking and locking of the vagina, basically. So take
Yeah.
us through what is the FGM ceremony that really enroots this traumatic memory that's, the girl that goes through it carries on till her adulthood.
Where in other countries they might have parties, get the girls dressed up, have dancing and music and food. In others, it's more secluded. It's, you don't get to do it in a group. There's no much music. There's no really much fun to it. And for others, it's done through hospital. For me, I did not have a party. It wasn't a celebration. It was more of an expectation. I remember in the small village that I lived in, it was so normalized that it was almost as if every girl expected to have it. You would hear about Guditan if this person had it done and this person had it done, and even the young girls who've had it done before would come up to you and say, "Oh my God, don't worry about it. It's amazing. You're gonna have a great experience. You're gonna feel so much cleaner. You're gonna feel like a woman." But we have never been able to comprehend what it means to become a woman, or what they meant by saying, "Oh, you're a lot cleaner now." Like, what does that even mean? So that was very strange. But you don't get to think for yourself. You think as part of the herd. You just accept what people are telling you. And you also we have seen young girls who were being bullied, being excluded from their communities because, okay, your children can't play with mine because your daughter isn't cut. Or they say directly to the girl, "Oh, look, it's the girl with the long clitoris," but she herself did not know where the clitoris is located, what a clitoris is, what the purpose for it is, but we were made to hate it. So there are some girls who then, even if the parents were trying to avoid it, but because of the social exclusion that they experience, they beg their parents to get it done for them. Or they ask the other members of their family because they are so desperate to fit in. As adults, we don't want to be excluded from any society that we feel comfortable and we feel like we belong to. So can you imagine a child, especially a child that is unaware of what they are asking for? It's easy to say, "Oh, she asked for it," but she did not have informed consent. So it's challenging being in countries where it is so normalized that it's just, just like in the UK where piercing is normal, It's like that. It's so normalized. You don't ever get to question, oh, this is a bad thing, or this is a big, and you don't get to see it with your own eyes until you are sat on that chair and you're experiencing it yourself. So for me, it was done alongside my cousin and my sister. I was 6 years old. My cousin was 5, and my sister was 7. And my grandma came to us and told us, you're going to have Guditan today. And we were excited. We were super excited. We were like, oh my God, finally, it's our turn. Again, we don't know what we were excited for. I don't know if you've ever been told, oh, something is going to happen, but you never really understood the concept of it. But because everybody else is so excited, you're also so excited, But we were really excited. And I remember when we entered, there were family members standing around. We thought, okay, it must involve them then. And then we saw a strange woman who none of us have ever seen before, old, she wasn't fragile old, but we could tell that she was old and kind of creepy looking. Because I'm sorry, if you have spent your whole lifetime cutting little girls, I can guarantee you look mad. You don't look like someone that a child can look at and think, oh, this person looks friendly. No, we thought, who is that? Almost like a scary figure, But then we thought, oh, because we're around the family, it's okay. She must be here for grandma or someone. So we just sat on the floor, waited patiently. And the way that my grandma's house was constructed, so you have the house, and then you have the front yard, and then you have gates around the house. The gates, it wasn't gates, it was sticks lined up to resemble gates to, mark your land, they would say. And there was no privacy because you could see through it. It was a very sandy floor. We were living in the wilderness at the time. There was a small stool made out of animal skin and wood. So it had 4 wooden legs, and the top was made out of animal skin. And she was sat on one, and there was an empty one. So we were looking at it, curious as to what's happening. But again, we were still playing, not taking much notice of everything that was really happening. They were just really having a conversation, So my grandma was speaking to her probably about the type of FGM she wanted for us to get. And then there's talk of money, obviously, because this is not done for free. So you're paying children to be tortured. And that's, again, something that I can't wrap my head around, not only making a living out of the misery of children, but also having family members pay to have their children be tortured and risk diseases and even death. So I remember my cousin being the first one to go. She was calm and happy. She, almost, I always say, because from what I remember, she was like, kind of skipping to the chair. And the moment she sat down, it was just grab, grab, grab. And we, having to watch this, were like, but why? Because she walked to the chair by herself. So why was it necessary for then to have the family members who were there, 4 or 5 of them, holding her down in a very violent and vicious and very quick way? We were very confused. We could not understand that. And then we started to kind of change our attitudes from feeling excitement to feeling confused and ultimately afraid. Then they separated her legs, and because the chair does not have any back support, there was an adult who had to stand in the back, try to hold the shoulders. There were adults holding on to her arms, and then there were adults having to separate her legs and keep her torso and butt down on that floor, on the chair, as firmly as and still as possible. And again, we thought, why are they separating her legs like that? Because again, we were taught within this community that, you know, you knew that you could never talk about your private parts. You knew that you could never show your private parts. Like, this was common knowledge. So we didn't understand why then she was having her legs spread wide open to a complete stranger, you know. And unfortunately, in these high prevalent countries, children grow up so fast that I cannot compare the Western children to the children in Somalia, for example, or in parts of Kenya, or in the Arab world. They grow up very, very, very fast. And they articulate themselves very well, and they have like a stronger mindset in terms of like how to behave. They can adapt to their environments very quickly. They are made to understand, not really understand by giving details, but just understand that you're not supposed to do certain things. You know, no one ever sat down with you, but you know that if someone in your family did it, you watched that person get beaten or get shouted at. So you would then have to try to avoid whatever they did.
It's like social codes. So it's a code, you know it, and you don't have to sit down and understand it.
We did not first see the blade that she was being cut with. The woman went between her legs and began to cut. And the moment the blade touched her skin, she let out a huge scream. She did not have any painkillers, no anesthetic. She was completely and utterly awake. So she felt every single cut. Every time that blade touched her skin, she felt it. So she started screaming, she started pleading. And I don't think I've ever heard anything like it till this day. I am 32 next month, and I have never heard a child scream like that since that day. I remember seeing blood dripping to the floor. Because of the pleading and the crying, and because it was so loud and just unbearable to listen to, they put a cloth in her mouth to stop her from screaming. Because they just seemed to me like they did not give a damn. Like they had a mission and they were going to complete the task at hand. And me and my sister looked at each other, and I think it was just, I don't think any words were exchanged. We looked at each other, we looked at the scene, and we decided to run. We ran, but living in a very small, tight-knit community, we were found and we were brought back by my uncle. We came back to the house, and my cousin was kind of slumped. Exhaustion, shock, it completely takes over your body. And after a while of fighting and trying to get free because of the adrenaline, the fear, the pain, after a while you just kind of give up. And because she was only tiny, she was so weak by the time we came back, and she was being physically sewn together. Once they were done, they tied her legs shut to prevent any ripping. Otherwise, they would have to sew you back up again. So they tied her legs together, they picked her up, and they put her on the floor. We have obviously have watched this, and we knew this is what's going to happen to us. That is the only moment, having witnessed it, we knew that we were next. So we finally understood what Guditan meant, and we did not want to go through it. We were dragged to, I was next. I was dragged to the seat that my cousin just bled out on. They sat me down and again took my limbs, held it. Do you know the strength of adults versus the strength of a child, you would think that the adults have a lot more power. And they do, in somewhat, they do. However, when you have just witnessed what is about to happen and your adrenaline is already going, you're not the oblivious child that walked into this house, you know exactly what is about to happen to you. You're going to fight. You're going to scream and shout and, do everything in your power not to stand or sit still. That was my aim anyway. I thought, okay, if I don't fight and if I sit still, then they're gonna cut a lot more. So that could have been dangerous. I could have died. But I spoke to my auntie many years later, after speaking out against it, and I said to her, "Do you remember that day?" I said, "Why did you have to like hold us down like that?" And she said, "Because you guys were fighting." And she said, "You were the worst." She said, "You did not want to put your butt down on the floor." I was doing everything I can to clench my bum so that it levitated somewhat off the seat. Because yes, you can hold my limbs, give me back support, separate my legs, but I did not, like I was moving my bum a lot more than maybe others have. But it was a constant fight. I did not want to stop fighting. Once the screaming began, the blade touched my skin. I became so overwhelmed that you let out this anguishing scream, because the pain is so overwhelming that I can't even, I genuinely cannot describe it to you what that felt like. It was excruciating. And they put a cloth in my mouth as well to stop me from screaming. But again, I was moving, I was trying to fight. And the reason why I say that is dangerous is because the person who is doing it to you has learnt this trade from their grandmother or their mother, somebody within their family who's a cutter. So their experience isn't like a doctor in this country, for example. They don't have the expertise. They don't know where the veins are, where the nerves are, so they're just cutting. And at the time, I was trying to stop these people from doing what they were doing and to try and make it as difficult as possible. But I also, by doing that, put more danger in my life because I could have died. She could have cut the wrong thing. I could have bled to death, But nevertheless, you can't then convince a child to sit still, even though they are being subjected to being pricked and cut and pricked and sliced. And it's a double-sided razor is one of the most sharpest equipments I have ever come across. Even a knife isn't as sharp as a double-sided razor. It cuts so seamlessly. It's absolutely terrifying. I used to be so scared to even hold a double-sided razor. Then I remember she just kept pricking, like holding on to the different parts of my vulva and just slicing. And it felt like it took hours, but I'm pretty sure it was maybe 30 to 45 minutes. She then cut my labia minora, my labia majora, my clitoris, but she cut, so if this is the clitoris, she cut half of it. She didn't cut the whole clitoris, she cut half, and it was kind of like sideways of slice. Our clitorises were not fully developed at the time. They didn't even give it a chance for it to develop. I think their aim was just to get rid of it or get rid of as much as you can, because they learned before that if they remove the entire clitoris, that the girl is more likely to bleed to death. So to prevent that, or to kind of stop that from happening, they would cut a part of it. This is why they say some people do it fully, others do it partly, but a lot of survivors don't know how much of their genitalia was truly cut until you are examined, and you then are told what is cut, what hasn't been cut, how much has been cut. We can only guess for majority of our lives, especially when you're being told the whole clitoris is gone. Then you grow up believing that your whole clitoris is gone. But in fact, for quite a lot of Somali women, I could say it's partly, because they realize girls would die if they cut the full thing. But even if you're cutting the labia minora, the labia majora, there is still a high risk of that child bleeding to death. Then I remember being sewn together. I remember my body becoming very weak. I was very tired of fighting. Every single limb of mine was aching because of the pressure that the adults were putting onto my body on top of being cut. And then I remember kind of doing what my cousin did, like going on like slumping almost due to the shock. And I turned to the side, and I remember the cutter having a clay jar, and half of it looked like it contained bits. It had blood on it. But at that moment I didn't understand, but I was focused on it. So I just kept looking at it, and come to find out it was the clitorises and the labia minora, labia majora, the parts that she has cut, not only of us, but she was cutting girls prior to her coming to us, because like I said, it was half full. Being physically sewn together is not something that I can describe. I have done multiple interviews, and I can never describe to you what it means to physically be sewn together, not only just be cut, but also the wound that was just cut to then forcefully put together and sewn. She left a small hole for urination and a small hole for period flow and future penetration. And oddly enough, the way that they check is they take the cotton wool that you clean your ears with, or something small. They take the cotton part out, and just using the stick, they insert it into the hole to make sure that it's that small, because it can't be too big. If it's this big, then they're gonna have to go down until it's tiny. They would use that to measure both holes. Different people use different things to measure this, the smallness of the holes. But for us, it was the stick of the cotton wool. And then they tied my legs together, put me to the side, and then I had to witness my sister be cut. And again, it was just trauma after trauma after trauma. Not only you having to go through it, but also watching your own sister and your own cousin go through it. And from that moment, I think I convinced myself that my family were out to kill us. Like, I genuinely believed that they were going to kill us. Okay, they might not have killed us this time, but they were planning on like finding different ways to try kill us, because it didn't make any sense. Why put me through that pain? Again, there was no explanation. Then a few weeks later, I thought it was the same day, but a few weeks later, my auntie, when I got a lot older and I started doing this type of work, I questioned her and I said, the day after, did you put blood on us? Because that's what I remember. And she said, no, 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 that was a week after. So a week after we were cut, they slaughtered an animal and they drained the blood and they put it all over our body. There was not an inch of our body that was not covered in animal blood from head to toe. And we had to stand on the hot sun naked with blood all over us. A week ago, having been cut. So can you imagine the risk of infection? You know, the animal blood touching a wound that was just cut. And I said to her, why did you do that? Because that in itself was even more traumatizing. And then having that blood washed off you, it's the most disgusting experience ever. So she explained that because there were no doctors in the village, there were no hospitals, there was no medical personnel. We caught a really bad fever because of the cut. And to prevent us from getting a lot worse, they traditionally used blood to treat fever. And she said, but it worked. I said, no, your ignorance made you think that it worked. Maybe for the grace of God, we were healed by him. But I can guarantee you, you putting blood from my head to my toes did not break my fever. But it was a very traumatic experience. And I remember we used to be carried to the toilet. We couldn't really walk. We couldn't play. We couldn't do any of the house chores, like milking, going to collect water or herding. We couldn't do any of it. We were always being monitored in case we got up or we started running around or walking around. I think it took a long time for us to heal. They say 40 days. I don't remember. I don't think I kept track of how many days. We didn't even know the days of the week, let alone keep track of, how many days has passed. We as kids at the time did not have any concept of time. But I know that it took a long time. The feeling of humiliation, being carried everywhere, family members coming around, everything very intrusive. It was very intrusive. And ultimately, when we started to begin to heal, we could walk a little bit. And I remember my little cousin being a baby. I was a baby at the time as well, but being a lot younger than us, she climbed a tree. She missed her footing and she fell. But she fell on a branch, which cut her, where she was just sewn, it tore her open. So because that happened, she had to then be sewn together again the same day that she experienced the fall. And so because that happened, we thought, okay, we really need to be careful. We can't be climbing trees and doing all of this and running around, because if you rip open, they're going to put it back. And we were not willing, I sure hell was not willing to go back and experience what I just experienced. So I adapted to being very, very careful. I was, being very aware of my steps, what I was doing. I knew which activities I couldn't take part in case, there was an accident and then I ripped myself open. I was only 6 years old. So imagine a child having to think about all of these things just to prevent you having to go through that again. I did not want to go through it. Eventually, my mother came and picked us up from Somalia. We went to Ethiopia, Addis Ababa to be specific, and we were waiting for a visa because my dad was already in the UK. And then we flew to the UK. So I've had a lot of weird experiences. You know, I've never seen a plane before. I've never seen a camera before. Um, you know, I don't think I know in the village, I've never seen a dog before, you know, or lights, or it was just such an unusual experience as a child, and especially having to meet my mom, who I have no memory of ever seeing, and you know, having to experience what it's like to have a mother was also very strange. At first, it felt like a stranger because I didn't know, you know, she was very pretty, but I was like, I didn't know who she was. You know what I mean? So it was very challenging. So I was going through a lot of challenging things for a very young child. We stayed in Addis Ababa for 9 months until our visa was approved, and then we took a aeroplane to the UK, and I've been here ever since.
Thank you for sharing with us, and in a very graphic way, really what happens. You know, two things came to my mind. We always say 230 million went through FGM, and it's like every single girl experienced exactly what you've experienced. So it's not like 230 went through. And the second thing I was thinking about menstruation, period. You know, when you were talking about suing and like the exact, you know, space they're leaving, I'm thinking about how do you go through your menstruation, what kind of products you use, because that's not like a giving. Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing because I've never understood the exact procedure, you know, the trauma and all of that, but the suing, it's first time I hear that you're cutting different parts, not just the clitoris, and then you're suing it. So the urination part now is also challenging, and then the menstruation part is challenging.
Yeah. It's a horrific experience to go through. It doesn't matter at what age, it is very traumatic for children. And a lot of them, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are some women who were cut as children and they don't remember, or they remember some bits, but you know, our mind works in very mysterious ways. And there are some cases where your brain is trying to protect you from remembering your trauma. And I remember, because again, we lived in such a normalized community where everything was just okay after you were cut. You're just like, oh, okay. You know, you're beginning to heal. You're not feeling that pain anymore. So you think, oh, okay, this must have been normal. So you start to then become one of those girls who was advising other girls to, no, it's okay, it's not that bad, even though you just experienced it, you know? But again, you are almost manipulated into believing that this is what you have to do. So you are then responsible for whatever information you give to the next girl. You can either scare her, or you can say, yeah, it's good, da, 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 because you can't speak against it. You have never seen anyone speak against it. And how can you speak against your grandma? How can you speak against your uncle? And in a lot of those countries, they are not afraid to beat you. You don't want to be beaten. So you just learn to stay silent. Silence is not something that is learned when you're in your teenage years or in your early adulthood or even late adulthood. You learn to stay silent at a very young age, very, very young age, and it becomes a norm. Silence for a lot of people is normality. They are used to it, you know, is expected, is required. And I remember when I was 9 years old, I got my period. I remember walking down the stairs. I was wearing a very pretty dress. I was already in London by then. And as I'm coming down the stairs, I can feel something going down my leg. And I look at it, like I go like this with my dress, like kind of like remove whatever it was. And I was wearing a very pink, very pink girly dress. And we had a lot of family over. And I look at it and it's red, like it's a different color to my dress. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I pick up my dress and I, use my hand to wipe whatever it is. And I look at it and it's blood. Oh my God. Then I screamed at the top of my lung and I'm like, I'm bleeding, I'm bleeding. So I'm calling out for my mom. My mom comes, she comes running. Mothers, the moment they hear their children scream, they are, very alert. She came and she goes, what's going on? What's going on? And I said, I'm bleeding, I'm bleeding. And I, picked up my dress and I said, look. And then when she saw it, she started laughing, and she's like, it's okay, it's okay. Don't worry, come, let's go upstairs. So we went upstairs, we went to the toilet. She took off my underwear that was stained. And then she bought a pad and she showed me how to open the pad. She showed me, but at the whole time I was in shock. I could not process what she was telling me. The funny thing is, she didn't even tell me why I was bleeding. I didn't understand why it was happening. She just said, oh, this is normal. It just means that you've become a woman. I'm like, oh, whoa, hold on. Like in my mind, I'm thinking, hold on, I swear I became a woman when I was 6.
Again.
I like, again, you're a woman. I'm like, okay, how many times do you have to become a woman? Then you start to like think like, okay, am I a woman now? Or was I a woman from then? Or did I just become a woman? Like it was confusing. And then we put a fresh pair of underwear on. She showed me how to stick the pad on. And then my mother said, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anybody that you've had your period. Don't tell your father, your brother, even your sister or any family members. It's shameful to talk about it. And I was like, I've heard that before. Again, with the whole silencing thing, it was common knowledge. So I said, okay, if it was shameful, I didn't want to talk about it. It's a woman's problem. So it shouldn't be something that's openly discussed. And I think she was afraid that because I got my period at a young age, that people were going to assume I'm a woman now. I think that's where, even though she said it herself, but she didn't want people to treat me like a woman. For example, to start suggesting marriage, oh, you can get married now, and like my mom didn't like things like that. So she just said, keep it between me and you. But then what happened is every single month, because my period had barely anywhere to come out, I was rolling from one side of the room to the other. I could not physically walk. I like was crouched down or bending. It was agony for 7 days straight. It's again, like I said, the blood is desperate to come out. And if the blood is leaving your body very slowly, then what happens? It accumulates inside of you. And then I was labeled as the sick child. Simply the sick child. My mom used to take me to the A&E every other month because I would throw up, I would have diarrhea, I would feel faint, I was having really high fevers, I couldn't walk, I couldn't eat, I could not function. So every other month or every month, depending on how bad it was, I would be taken to A&E. And then they would, look at my stomach, see if there was any disease or illness that was contributing to why I was in so much pain. The doctors did not make the connection between my FGM and my period and why I was in so much pain. My mother didn't make the connection between my FGM and the reason why I was in so much pain with my period. So the doctors thought I was a medical mystery. They could not understand why I was so ill. And my mother couldn't understand why I was so ill. So every few months, she would bring men to the house to read Quran on me in case I was affected by the evil eye, or I was being affected by the shaitan or the jinn. And I'm just looking at them like, I'm not, the devil is not inside of me. Okay. I don't know what's wrong with me, but because everyone around me didn't understand what was happening to me, I didn't understand what was happening to me. So, and I was told to keep this a secret. So I'm not going to tell the doctor that I'm bleeding. You know, I was told to, and I took that quite literally. So I was a medical mystery. They started reading the Quran on me. I would be taken to places, be given potion-like things to try heal me. And they would say that I shared the evil eye with my mother when she was pregnant with me, or the jinn was to marry me, or they would say these odd things. And I'm just like, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. Like, it genuinely doesn't make any sense. But then I'm like, why would the jinn want to marry me? Like, what does it see in me? You know? What is it going to do with me? I can't even see it. So it was so confusing to be a young Shamsa. And eventually, by the time I reached 14, I started physically ripping because my skin is very sensitive. And by then, the skin has healed shut, right? So because the period had nowhere to come out, properly, it started because you know how I believe the way that it was explained to me was because every month, whatever, the accumulation that was happening, some of it would dry out a little, so it was ripping physically through the healed scar, damaged scar tissue, to try, I don't know, get out. And I remember when the rippings first started, I was sat on a toilet trying to pee, and I could feel the stinging. And I kept it a secret. I thought if I tell my mom, because I was 14 years old by then, I was a little bit more educated. And I thought if I tell my mom, she's probably going to think I had sex. She's probably going to think I was touched up, or that I did something, or I went and slept with a boy. So I said, I don't want to have that conversation. Anyway, it got so bad that I had to go and tell her. So I sat down with mom and I said, I'm ripping. She looked at me, she's like, what do you mean you're ripping? I said, I'm ripping. I don't know. I said, I'm ripping. I can feel my vagina ripping, the vulva. And she said, yeah, but why? I said, I don't know. I don't know, but I know that it's happening because I'm in a lot of pain. And then the questions of, did you have sex? No. Were you touched by a boy? No. Did you touch yourself? No. Were you assaulted? No. Did you fall? No. But she was like, in this many years that I've been living, I have never heard a woman who has had FGM tell me that she's ripping. Like, this was literally a first for my mom. Hence why she had so much doubt as to why it happened, because she's never heard the vulva ripping after it's healed shut for that many years. So she said, it's that's impossible. So she took me to the NHS, the National Health Service here in the UK. I was seen by a female gynecologist. I opened my legs very wide, as I was instructed to, but because of my trauma, I'm always like this. And she's like, no, keep them open. So it's like my body was working against me. I did not want, because it was the trauma of separating your legs, so your mind and your body, your mind, that you have to separate it, but your body was like, nope. And then you're like, okay. And then my body was fighting against me. she then examined me. She looked at my mom and she basically said, "Oh, it's her because of her FGM." And by then, I think they found out about the fact that I was having a period, even though nobody actually explained, or the pain that you're going through is due to your period. Nobody ever explained that. But because they knew about my FGM, they said, "Oh, it's just her skin, the period needs somewhere to come out. So it's just ripping, tearing through her skin, or it's causing her to have a tear." And my mom was like, "Oh, okay. Is she a virgin?" And she looked and she said, "Yeah." I don't even know what she's looking at because it was open by that much. Like, so I was like, I looked at her and I'm like, "Okay, thank you for confirming my virginity. It is what it is." And I walked out of the hospital room with paracetamol, even though I was a child sewn together. They were like, "Okay, have a great day. Here's some paracetamol. Just take it regularly and you'll be fine." Nobody said if the ripping was going to continue, what should I do about it? Were there ways to help me? None of that conversation was had.
Oof. I mean, when I was talking about period, I was thinking more pad, tampon, cup, not allowed, but like to really see how
No, I don't think a survivor would ever touch any of those.
so who do you hold responsible for FGM?
To be honest with you, the world. I can't say one individual because it's the world's continuous ignorance is why FGM continues to exist. The lack of education that is provided to those who are not only affected, but those who are at risk. Before, I used to hold my grandma accountable and my aunties and my uncles who held me down. I thought as a parent, you should have known better. You know, my mom did not want FGM for me, but since it happened, it was like, oh, what can I do? That was the attitude. It wasn't, okay, let's solve the problem. It was, okay, what can we do? We're just going to stay like this now. So it was just very difficult to, it's not always necessarily the mother who wants to subject her child to FGM. Sometimes it's the father, sometimes it's the grandma, sometimes it's the auntie, sometimes it's the sister. So there are a lot of people that are involved in this, that should be held accountable and should take responsibility for the reason why these children are being cut. But it's very difficult to just put one person out there and say it's your fault, because it's, from my personal experience, I don't hold any of them accountable anymore. Because even if I would, trust me, I have sat down with these people and I have had in-depth conversation, and it's like I'm speaking to a wall. That's what it feels like sometimes. There's no accountability. There is no, I'm sorry, that this shouldn't have happened. We should have never allowed this to happen. There's none of that. It's always, yeah, but it's something we always do, or it's part of our faith. It's a necessity. And especially in a country where your child's whole identity is dependent on marriage. And then you have grown-ass men or young boys being brought up to say, we want a woman who's cut. We want a woman who's been cut. So parents are going to then resort to doing it just so that their daughter has a chance at being married. Otherwise, this is not just social exclusion. No man will touch you. Not that we want men to touch us, but they wanted to find us husbands, or for us to have husbands, but it has to be someone who would accept you for you. And at the time, especially when they grew up, they had a worse type of FGM. These women were scraped from the inside, then cut, then sewn together. So in their mind, they're doing us a favor by not scraping us. So it sounds really silly, but my grandma's generation, I don't blame for the way that they were thinking. because just like old people in care homes here in the UK, some of them are really racist. You know, you could be giving them breakfast and they'll be like, "Oh, thank you, my slave," or, you know, they'll use the N word, or, and you can't change their mind. You can't, it doesn't matter how many times you try. Those people are so far gone that any level of education for a lot of them, it's just, you know, you can keep trying, keep trying, keep trying, but we're just going to have to wait for them to die out. And I know, as horrible as that sounds, it's just hope that, you know, they peacefully go, so that we can continue educating the generation younger than them, and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
I can't be angry, because if I carry resentment and hatred and anger, then it doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit my healing journey. It doesn't benefit, you know, my future. It doesn't benefit me in any way, shape, or form.
Mm.
So now, when I speak to my auntie, who has grandchildren, I say to her, you know, because she knows what I do for a living, and she's like, I said, do you plan on cutting them? And she said, no. She said, listen, Shamsa, we at the time did it out of ignorance. We did not know that, even though we experienced it ourselves, but we weren't aware fully of, in terms of education, about the complication, the fact that it can cause infertility. What grandmother or what mother wants to cause infertility to her child? Nobody does, because they want babies. These people are obsessed with baby making and getting married. So they would never do anything to jeopardize their child, you know, having future offspring. So if they had this education, they probably would not have done it. If they knew that it was against the faith, rather than the way that they learned was, this is part of your faith. And these are faithful women who have finished the Quran 100 times, you know? So when women are so faithful and so committed to their culture and so committed to their partners and their community and their country, they are easily manipulated, easily lied to, especially if you don't have any educational background, if you've never been to school, if you live in a rural area, if you've never heard someone else say, actually, no. It takes one person to change the mind of somebody else. And then that person could change the mind of somebody else. But if you don't ever hear any new ideas or any new conversations around this topic, then you just continue existing in ignorance.
There are many stereotypes about FGM, and maybe the two common ones is this is a Muslim problem and this is a Black people problem. What do you think about that?
It's not. It is not just a Black people problem, and it sure hell is not just a Muslim problem, because we know that this practice or form of crime happens within the Jewish community, it happens within the Christian community, it happens across the world in every single country. Okay, almost every single country globally. This exists, whether it's in Singapore, whether it's in Malaysia, Indonesia, and you can look at those countries and say, oh, it's only Muslims that you know get it done, but then you're doing a great injustice for all the other people following different faiths who are also part of this cutting culture. In the UK, I believe it was in the 1970s, where I think 1970s, 1960s, where women were hospitalized if they were deemed to be too sexually active, or, you know, they they used to say that women having a voice, for example, was a form of mental health, and that they are somewhat, you know, not well in the head. So women who were different were being hospitalized, and they were being subjected to FGM, and it's documented. So this is not, it wasn't an African problem. It happened and has continued to happen all over the globe. In the US, there is a woman who is an FGM survivor. She is a white woman in her 60s now, who was subjected to FGM purely because She used to, when she was 3 years old, she used to touch her vulva, and family members freaked out, or her mother freaked out. She took her to a doctor, a medical doctor, and in the US, this is not free, by the way. You have to pay for this. So she was advised to have her daughter's clitoris cut, or parts of her vulva removed, so that she could stop being so overly sexual. She was 3. You know, you're just learning about different parts, and if you see a girl going anywhere near her vulva, then it's supposedly a crime, and that needs to be sorted. So even the advice of some doctors was just cut her. Whether she was 12, whether she was 3, whether she is the exact same ideology. Even in the UK, till this day, in the UK, all across Europe, all across the Western, most developed side of the world, they still cut women to this day. Vaginoplasty is a form of FGM. Labiaplasty is a form of FGM. So I don't understand, you know, yes, now you are advertising to young women, when the young women that tend to see these advertisements are those on social media, for example, those that are actively on the internet. They see advertisements, oh, you can shorten your labia minora, you can shorten your clitoris if it's too big, you can, you know, cut it so it's, you know, very cutesy and your vagina looks like a child's.
It's like commercial.
It's very commercialized, very overly sexualized. It's like beautifying the vagina, as if our vagina that we were born with is ugly. We don't do that to men. We don't look at their penis and think, oh, you know, this is ugly. We need to strip this. We need to strip that. We need to make it, you know, this size. You need to make it a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. We don't do that. So why are women's vulvas always being inspected and dissected on a daily basis? For the benefit of who? There are young girls age 16, 15, when they see these things, they go to the NHS, for example. There was a young girl, she went when she was 16, and she asked the gynecologist to have her labia minora cut. And she said, it's causing me discomfort. But she said out of her own mouth that I mostly did this because of my insecurities that were brought about by society, that kept telling this beautiful girl that your vulva is not enough, that the way that your vulva looks is just, no, it needs to be changed, it needs to be altered. So it's the same as if you were in Africa, you're being told, no, it's to make you, you know, to do it for cleanliness, but except here it's beautifying. There are some women in Asia who think that being cut is a lot more prettier because you don't have things hanging, and you know, you don't have bulks of things. It's just very like, but we are constantly telling girls that their vulvas is not enough, and they are going to these doctors. They are either getting it done for free or having to pay for it, and in some cases they are damaged. The same way that FGM damaged us is the same way that it damages them. And when you look at these websites and look at the complications that can arise from these surgeries, they are identical to FGM. Hemorrhaging, frequent infections, scarring, problems with childbirth, periods, urination, sensitivity within the clitoris. And we're trusting our bodies, especially with doctors who are not very well versed on the vulva. I know in the UK they are not. They are not. They could try and convince me as much as they like that they know so much about the female vulva, but they don't. It is the most under-researched part of a human female body. The male penis is researched a lot more than the female vagina. Even though the female vulva and the vagina is what brings life into this world, but it is the most under-researched. So this young girl, when she went to the gynecologist, they said, yeah, we can do it for you. She went, they sent her to another gynecologist. He said, yeah, we can do it for you. But before we can say for definite, you need to go to like the head of that gynecology department. So when she went and had a meeting with them, they said to her, we can't do it now because it would be considered as FGM. Why don't you come back when you are over the age of 18? And when they are over the age of 18, what does that mean? What does that tell you? Not only are you telling them that this is FGM if they do it as a child, so you're telling them to come back when they seamlessly have the ability to consent, right? Where you can fill out forms for yourself. Then it's not considered FGM, but they are not given the full informed consent that they need in order to make such a decision. They are told this is what the surgery consists of. They might be told about the risks, but they will never sit there and say, you don't need it. You don't need it. You know, you can find different ways to deal with your comfort issues in terms of your vulva, but you do not need the surgery. You don't require it. When they fill out that form, they undergo the surgery and it goes wrong. Do you think doctors are going to be held accountable? Have you ever seen a doctor being held accountable for any damage that they have caused to a woman's vulva? No, because you asked for it. You knew the risks. You consented. You came and looked for us. You signed those papers. You put yourself on that operating table. So you did it to yourself. You knew the risks and you still took it, right? And then there's no conviction. There is a embarrassment. There is shame. There is thinking, oh my God, what have I done to myself? You know? And then they are experiencing the same silence that FGM survivors do. They are now experiencing feeling like they are less than. You know, now they have parts missing, that their vulvas look mutilated or cut or disfigured or abnormal. And women use words like this when their vulva have been affected. Even whether they are trying to go for the beautified version or it's just, you know, the typical FGM that everybody knows.
Yeah.
But it comes under the same umbrella. It's still considered FGM. But because it's the Western world doing it, it's okay. But the reason why education in terms of FGM focuses mostly on Africa is because look how horrible theirs is. But ours is okay. The same exact thing. Even women are getting it done purely to please their husbands, their partners, their boyfriends, or a friend of them made a comment and they went and did it. It is the same brainwashing of women. So you cannot convince me that this is just an African problem. It's not just an African problem. You're cutting your women here by the number, and you're causing them to have the same complications as FGM survivors, but you don't want them to ever compare themselves to us because we are lower. We are coming from poor countries, according to them, because Africa is not Africa, but African countries are not poor. There's the idea that these people have nothing, and you don't rob or you don't go and seek resources from poor countries, you know? So if you're coming to Africa for gold, for oil, for resources, you cannot then refer to us as being poor, as being a third world country, you know, a war-torn continent that has nothing and is only poor people that live there. But then that gives an opportunity for the rest of the world to look at us like, oh, these barbaric people, these evil human beings. But respectfully, you are just as barbaric. You just glamorized it. You know, these people are doing it out of ignorance, but you have a whole education system. You have a national health service. You have a criminal justice system. You have everything, and just still continue to subject women to cutting. You might not be physically sewing them together, but even that, happens to some women in this country when they're giving birth, for example. So it takes one doctor to just do too much. So I don't like the idea of, oh, it's just Africa, as if like we are just purely barbaric and evil, and our culture is horrific. And no, babe, we are all on the same boat. It happens everywhere. And by excluding all of those women, you are basically saying that we should just focus on this group, but all the Arabs, all the Indians and Pakistanis and everybody else you're excluding out of this conversation, including white women, which is not fair.
Yeah, it's the double standard. As always, it's not new to Europe, And I think also like hearing you, it's really the fetishizing of everything, like FGM, whether it's to be ready for marriage or whether it's to please the gaze of the male, is always about fetishizing women. I want to talk about your reconstruction surgery. If you'd like to share more light into it, and I see a lot of people now talk about it and recommend it to a lot of FGM survivors.
Yes. So I was contacted by a survivor when I started my activism, and we're very close till this day. She explained to me that she had underwent reconstructive surgery. She explained the process, and I've never heard of it before in the UK. That conversation was not being had at all. So I started doing my research. I spoke to the doctor that I looked into the doctor that she recommended. Eventually, I contacted the doctor. I had my consultation with the doctor, and he told me in detail things that I have never heard of the UK National Health Service say. I have seen many gynecologists who told me nothing can ever be done for me. Actually, they said no doctor in this country would touch you. That's what they said to me. So the fact that he was telling me things that I never knew about my own body at my big age, I was utterly shocked. And it made me realize that actually there's the UK does not know anything about FGM survivors or how to help FGM survivors. So I made the decision, confidently trusting my doctor, Dr. Dan O'Day from Germany. I underwent a 4.5 hours surgery, and he reconstructed my clitoris, my labia minora, and my labia majora. And I can confidently say not only does my vulva have function, but I feel whole. That is something that I haven't felt in years. The healing, you need support when you're healing. Of course, I didn't have that. So yes, I might have had struggles after the surgery. I'm a single parent living far away from all family. So I had to get up, go to school, bring her back from school. I had to cook, I had to clean with my legs far apart like this because I couldn't keep my legs together. Where with the FGM, you had to keep your legs together. But after the surgery, you have to kind of walk with your legs a little bit apart because it's a fresh wound and you don't want it to stick. But Dr. O'Day was very understanding, explained everything in a lot of detail. He knew what he was doing. And he did it with so much care and so much empathy that I have never seen from a man in my entire life. So I support his work, absolute, and I would love for the world to learn his technique so that a lot of survivors can be helped, but again, it's the pride of this industry where it's like, oh, but what about my technique? But if you know that a technique works for women, why the fuck would you give a damn whether it's, yours or somebody else's, as long as it works, But it's pride, it's, ego, especially usually from men. But I trusted him fully, and I'm glad that I did. And I started openly talking about it, the concept of reconstruction surgery. And I realized how many women were in the dark about it. And now a lot of women want it. They go and seek it. So I am so super proud of each and every one of them for taking ownership of their lives, for wanting change, for wanting to heal, for wanting to make changes. And even if the world looks at them and says, oh, why did you undo what, was done to you years ago? You should have just left it. I would advise anybody to tell those people to go get a life, okay, and stay in their own business and not have any say about what I am doing with my body, because you did not sit and console me and help me understand when this shit was being done to me. So you have absolutely no leg to stand on, and I'm old enough to tell you to fuck off.
Your activism is driven from being a voice, and also being able to talk about these issues candidly, graphically, and the reality, really, which we don't find much in this advocacy around FGM. Is all about policy, it's all about the numbers. But within your activism, what challenges you faced as an FGM survivor, trying to do things differently and to raise awareness in a different way?
I think one big challenge I faced is the fact that I'm not an organization. I don't know. I feel like people are more willing to hear somebody if they have an organization, or if they are running an organization, or if they are a part of an organization. But when I started speaking, I was not a part of an organization, and my voice managed to capture the ears and eyes of millions of people worldwide. So I know that it's not a necessity for me to open a charity or an organization in order for me to be heard. If that's the case, then do we expect every single survivor that comes out of the woodwork to start their own organization when the goal is the same? There are already hundreds and thousands of organizations that focus on FGM. So, why should I then add to that when we should all collectively be working together? And another thing I realized is there's no collective working. There is, collaborations and small partnerships, but it's not long term. It's just for the moment, and they both move on. But it's like they all, I can't even say all of them because I don't know every single FGM charity in the UK, but there are quite a few that I have seen, that I have worked with, that I'm like, this is a bit odd. Why is it not collective? Why aren't all of you coming together and speaking out against FGM? Why are we not having marches that are organized by all of these charities? Why are we not having bigger events? Why are we not all collectively going to the government and saying, okay, we need to change the way that we educate about FGM? It feels like everybody wants, their own funding. Everybody wants their own, their own statuses and their own, I don't know what it is, but I feel very icky about it. It's actually made me doubt activism altogether. And it took a long time, this whole 2024, for me to actually really sit with that and think, okay, how is this going to be plausible? There has been a 15% rise in FGM since 2016. That means an extra 30 million women were cut. And you're telling me you're still in the rights? I wasn't even there. I was not part of any of this back in 2016. My head only popped out in 2020. That's when I started to share my story, right? So a 15% rise, and I'm sorry, but the charities need to be held accountable for that. Organizations need to be held accountable for that, because the money wasn't going to the most affected areas or prevalent countries. It was going to charities right here. Okay, so that you didn't change the education system. Women still don't have healthcare. They have zero access to psychosexual support. They have zero access to reconstructive surgery. The education system only focuses discriminatory on Africa. Then what have we done right? What have you done right? What have you done with the hundreds and thousands and millions of pounds that was given in funding? What changes was made? When I'm still hearing the basics, the basics. And I think one of the reasons why Shamsa has become so popular is not because my story is so unique. My story somewhat is unique to me. But when you look at the whole of FGM, it's not a unique story. This is the story of millions of women. But what makes me me is I don't like injustice in any way, shape, or form. So when I'm looking at a charity and I'm working with you and I'm excited and then I'm seeing things that I don't really agree with, then it makes me think, okay, I don't like this. I don't like the way that you're working. I don't like the minimal work that you're doing, how hard you're fighting for funding, but you're still not doing anything. And you're making me question the charity scene. You're making me question organizations and foundations that are supposed to be helping women. But I'm sorry, a lot of these women don't even know that they exist. So who are you helping? You know, and it's starting to really get on my nerves. As a survivor and as a social activist, I don't mind losing. First of all, I'm never going to lose my voice. I'm never going to lose my name. The most you guys could do as a whole, or anybody who has something against what I am saying, is say you disagree with me. And if you disagree with me, you better come with evidence as to what it is that you're doing. But if you should not feel threatened, you know, if I'm telling you that a lot of charities are working in ways that are unethical and are not doing the job that they're meant to, if you see that as an insult, maybe you are not doing the right thing. But we need to do a lot more work because what we are doing now is nowhere near enough. And the UN has a goal to end FGM by 2030. 2030. That's
In 5 years.
years. You're telling me since 2016 you've had a 50% rise, but you want to end the whole of FGM by 2030 by doing what exactly? By doing what? Even the UN, I'm looking at them sideways and I'm thinking, what is it that you do? The education system in the whole globe has not changed. You know, the way that we approach FGM has not changed. We can see that things are not working where we've had a 15% rise. How about we start to change things? How about you let survivors take the lead? If you don't know how to do your jobs, we know our communities, we know our countries, we know our people, we know our women. Let us handle it and support us. And if you can't, because we don't have an organization, I will start an organization just for you.
So do you have any shout outs to, advocates in the space you admire their work, or survivors or initiatives that you think, okay, this is working?
There are quite a few. I know a charity called Dorcas. They are based in Birmingham who help survivors directly. You know, once they get a referral, is all hands on deck. They will be over and beyond for that survivor. I am currently working with them on a case, and I have witnessed this with my own eyes. I've even had this conversation with them, and they also agree, you know. So I want charities to be more hands-on, okay? More hands-on. These survivors need the support, and I can guarantee you, if you give them the right support, they can then support somebody else or support another survivor, or they can say, you know what, this charity was amazing, they helped me. Not send those women back into the community to say, you know what, stay away from those charities, they are bad. We don't want that, you know. So it defeats the purpose if we are not helping these women. There is an initiative that I heard in Africa where a woman took the power to go to the ground directly to the people most affected. And she said, I will pay for your daughter's education throughout their schooling if you promise not to cut them. She also gave cutters a different trade. So rather than cutting, because you economically you need money, right? You can't just say put the blade down, because that woman will look at you like, okay, how am I supposed to feed my child? How am I going to take care of these animals? You know, give them a different trade, give them a different idea. Maybe use the funding to help these cutters put down the blade, and then we would have less cutters in the world. Governments need to implement harsher sentences, extremely harsher measures in order to deter people from going and doing this possibly secretly. And even if they did do it secretly, for those people, everybody involved needs to be punished, and they need to be made an example out of, so that the cycle does not continue. It's not just enough to speak against FGM. For me, I look at FGM as an infected plant, something that has been planted so deep in the ground that it has taken many roots, and it's very strong in the way that it stands. So we just need to rip the whole plant. If we cannot save the tree itself, then we need to rip it from the roots, so that the idea of FGM does not regrow. And like I said before, if there are initiatives where cutters are being given a new trade, in order for them to make a living without having to cut children, then the cutters have been taken care of. And then educating the community, educating little girls, making sure, that they understand that you might feel like you're being excluded from your community, but that is better than being tortured, and having to go through a lifetime of complications. You have done your job then in educating the young, educating the wider community, and educating the possible doctors, other medical staff, teachers. FGM, when we look at the blocks that hold FGM up, there are so many blocks that hold it up. You can't just demolish the whole block because it's firmly put in place. So you need to remove block by block by block until there are no more blocks left. So it's something that needs to be approached from different sides, and it is doable. These people, especially the younger generation, can be saved, but we're not going to do that with the minimal basic education that we are getting now, which results in the dehumanization of survivors, which I myself have experienced since I was a child. And I continue to experience, because I think a lot of people, when survivors speak, whether it's a survivor of rape or domestic violence or FGM or honor killing, any gender or honor-based crime, it's almost as if we are there just for our stories to be heard. But in reality, we are the change makers. We understand these forms of crime like nobody else, especially people that have lived through it. And something as complex as FGM, survivors are the ones who have the power to end it. So we cannot continue dehumanizing those survivors and making them out to be just human beings with unique stories. No, they are educators. A lot of us are academics. We are well-educated people. We have degrees. We are capable of taking parts in training, in educating. We are not just a vessel with a story to tell. We are human beings with a power to end these form of crimes that we always talk about ending, but we don't actually take the steps that are needed in order to end it. We need to listen to what survivors are saying, and it's not, coming to an event or listen to a podcast and, hearing a survivor story, that is not going to be enough. These survivors need to be put in front of audiences where the message will continuously be spoken. As for me, for example, I have been doing this for a very long time, and I get the feeling that I am nothing but a survivor sometimes. Someone who's just simply survived FGM, marital rape, forced marriage, domestic violence, and that's just what I am to some people. But I am a lot more than that. I am a mother. I am an educator. I am an academic. I did not go and seek a policing and criminal investigation degree just to sit and tell you a story and then move on. No, I am here for a reason. I have a purpose. So give these women a chance to actually do what it is that you, as the general world, have failed to do for many years. Let them feel like they are a part of the change rather than being just a story, being shared constantly. We are not just a story. We are human beings. We carry these stories. These are our unique stories. Every human being on this planet has a story, but they also have skills. They have talents, and they have the IQ to make a huge difference. So treat them like they are capable human beings, you know? So I think that is the only solution. We cannot just categorize survivors as people who have simply just stories. We're not just walking stories. We have something to offer. And if people do not consider us to be the lawmakers, the changers of this world, the people who are, able and capable of taking part in trainings, helping people truly understand what it is. When a person who has never experienced FGM or any form of gender-based violence is giving a educational training, it lacks true understanding of what it means to be a victim at that moment and what it means to be a survivor. But if you have survivors like myself take part in these trainings, not just to tell a story, but truly do these trainings and actively participate in these trainings, then I can guarantee you without a shadow of a doubt, you would have a bigger impact. People will open their ears and will be more willing to support and make a change. But again, we need to take survivors very serious.
So, Shamsa, what would be your love letter to survivors?
My love letter to survivors of not only FGM, but all forms of gender and honor-based violence would be, you are a survivor. And to me, what that means is you're breathing. You have a chance to live, to experience, to really own not only your story, but your future. Take ownership of your body, to take control, your resilience in surviving all of these different forms of violence is absolutely incredible. You are brave, you are so strong. And honestly, I think as survivors, you guys are the most strong, the most resilient, the most incredible human beings to ever walk this earth. Because women are often expected to endure and to do it in silence. But as a survivor, a lot of us want something different. We don't want to endure anymore. We don't want to be silent anymore. And I am telling you that you don't have to be silent. You have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, because at the end of the day, shame is not for survivors to carry. It is for predators, for the suspects, and for the abusers to, to feel that weight. It is not for survivors to feel that weight. So I want survivors to live. and not only live for themselves, but live for the countless millions of women who have lost their lives. Live like you have never lived before, because you are capable, you are deserving of everything in this planet, and you deserve peace. You can obtain it, you can obtain happiness, joy, financial freedom, all of that. But a lot of us, we doubt ourselves because the world has taught us to doubt ourselves. Although we have survived the unsurvivable, we are constantly told that we are not enough. But I can guarantee you are more than enough. You are more than capable, and you can achieve everything you have ever desired. Find your purpose, because each of you have a purpose. Your lives have been saved somewhat. I call it a divine intervention, because you have a purpose. You have a purpose to take part in activism, whether it's only for yourself or you're advocating for others. You are deserving of the best that this life has to offer. And most of all, I look at survivors or just humans in general. Our body is temporary. We will leave this body, it will be put on the ground when we die, and our souls will transition. So the best thing that us survivors can do is treat our body the way that the world has refused to treat our body. So honor it, savor it, make sure that you're not pouring into someone else's cup whilst yours is empty. Make sure you set boundaries. Make sure you know your limits. Make sure you know what you can and won't accept, And also, as it sounds easier said than done, but we need to learn to let go. And letting go doesn't mean completely forgetting what happened to you, but letting go so that you can continue to have a better quality of life than what we have experienced in the past. And I can guarantee, I don't know if you believe in God or not, but every single predator and abuser will get their day in judgment. They'll get their day of judgment. They will get their day of torment. And I can guarantee you those are miserable people. I don't want survivors to be miserable. I want survivors to be happy, to show the world you tried multiple times to beat me and crush me and cut me and lower my self-esteem and tell me I am stupid, but you're incapable. But show the world that we don't give a shit anymore as women, as survivors, as human beings, that we know what we deserve. And as long as we know what we deserve, I can guarantee you we will not accept any less. And I am so, so, so proud of each and every one of you for just existing, for surviving, for being the incredible people that you are, and everything that you bring into the world. Because without you, the world would not be the same.
We always end the episode with I am Nala because, so why are you Nala?
I am Nala because I am in control. I am resilient. I want peace. I want love. I want happiness, because it's what I deserve. It is what is required. It is what I expect.